or if you're on your mobile device? Probably not. There might be some additional things, right? It might be nice to do some GPS location finding to get directions and integrate with that. That would be cool. But for the most part, what do you want to do? You want to find out the hours they're open, right? Maybe you want to get a sense of what's in their menu, what's their prices, where they're located, how to call. Chances are, I'm going to want to do those things whether I'm sitting in front of a desktop or I'm on my mobile device. So in other words, the goals of the two different kinds of users probably aren't that drastically different. Now we could maybe come up with a few small, subtle differences, the directions was one example. Being able to hit a button and call the restaurant as opposed to simply displaying the phone number. So I'm not saying that there's going to be identical goals, but there's going to be very similar goals between those kinds of users. As far as separate sites go, I think the college is a perfect example. You are going to be accessing, if you have a choice, you're going to be accessing, you're not expecting to plan your career on your mobile phone on a college website. You're expecting just to get maybe some up-to-minute news about closings, find out how to contact someone in a pinch, those sorts of things. All right? So, what we're going to do in this class, really, is we're going to sort of cover all these in one form or another, sort of move across this. We probably will do it much in this direction. Start with simple one responsive site using HTML and CSS techniques. Getting into making our sites a little more responsive by including scripting, whether it be client-side or server-side. Then getting into having multiple separate sites, all right? And as we're doing that, keep in mind, we still got these techniques that we can apply as well, all right? So as we even go into the separate sites, we can still make each of those responsive. We can still use these techniques we learned over here. So it's kind of a cumulative effect. So let's start out looking with HTML and CSS techniques for responsive websites. Let me look at the time first of all. All right, I've got about 10 minutes left. Good. Responsive sites using only HTML and CSS. And truth be told, it's mainly going to be using CSS. All right? Because what are we talking about here? We're talking about changing the appearance of the page. All right? And as we know, the appearance of the page is dictated by CSS. Now, again, depending on when you had CISS268 with me, but regardless of when you had it, one of the key things I emphasized was having a clean separation between the HTML and CSS. And don't do things via HTML that relate to the physical appearance or the physical layout of the page. That is sort of our starting ground. That's our base assumption. So we're not going to ever use tables to control the layout of a page. We're never going to use tables. Why? Because that locks us down to a particular design. And we can style that table and we can move things about, but it's always going to be a table. And in responsive web development, there will be times where we don't want it to be two side-by-side columns, or we want it to be one long column. All right? So first thing to remember is remember your fundamentals and remember good practice of having a clean separation between HTML and CSS. All right? So that's sort of the first starting point. That's like the assumption. I won't even call that number 1. I'll call that number 0. All right. What are some of the other principles of this? number 1, flexible layouts. So, in CISS268, again, depending on when I taught it, I may have emphasized fixed layouts, or may have talked about fixed layouts and flexible layouts. Here, we want to do everything flexible. And what do I mean by flexible? I mean doing things like using percentages for widths, and also using the float to do the positioning. Yes?
Are you big on using like the, is it the EM for the font size and whatnot?
That is a good practice too, as opposed to not a fixed font size. That's a good point too. Use EMs for font. So all of this is going to be flexible. We want to focus on what we call liquid layouts. All right. If you think about it, liquid layouts are sort of, primitive-ish version of a responsive web page, right? Because as the screen changes, the page changes in response. All right. So maybe a column gets narrower, maybe a column drops down underneath, and so on. I guess that's an important consideration too. Another thing that we can talk about, we probably won't have time to talk about today, but how ought a mobile page look different than a desktop page? Well, typically mobile pages often are single column as opposed to double column. All right. Mobile pages have less gratuitous stuff, so maybe less images, maybe less background images, or less sort of window dressing. In general, are simpler. And can even be simpler in terms of content. The whole thing of there might be some things that you typically don't do on a mobile device that you would allow them to do on a desktop device. So we might reinforce that a little bit next time. But that's sort of the first step in this. The second step is flexible images. In other words, we can specify widths for images, and we can specify that as a percentage. And then the images will expand and contract based on the size of their container, right? Because yes. So if we were to say that the image had a width of 50%, it'll take up 50% of its container. All right? Whatever that container is. The container could be a div, it could be the body of the page, it could be whatever. So that way, as we resize the image, as we resize the page, the image will also resize. Again, this is something that, if you think about it, is something we'd want to do on a mobile device. You have a giant screen, you might want to see a bigger image. You have a small screen, you might want to see a smaller image. So this is good, again, even if you're talking about a desktop device, or definitely good if you're talking about a mobile device. The third piece here, and again, those of you that had CISS268 from me within the past couple years, we went over an example of this, and we'll definitely have an example of this next time, is using media queries. To apply different CSS. All right. What are media queries? Media queries are when you can specify right in the CSS the circumstances under which that CSS applies. For example, even prior to mobile devices, you could have a different CSS apply to a printed document as opposed to a document that you had on the screen. Sort of makes sense, right? If I am going to print, like if you go to Google Maps, you view it on the screen, it looks one way. You go to print it out, it's the same data, it just is laid out drastically different. All right, so I don't know how they accomplish that. They could accomplish that with a different CSS file displaying the same content. All right. This effectively is allowing us to apply different CSS files to our own page. All right, to our page. All right, based on some criteria. And typically the criteria we're going to use is screen width, all right? Because screen width is a pretty good indicator of the kind of device that we're on, all right? Especially if we talk about maximum screen width. There's no computer that has a maximum screen width of 400 pixels, right? But there are phones that have that, all right? So we can distinguish that way. Now, there's examples of this in the book, and we will go over a concrete example in class next time. I do want to review a couple of points regarding this, just to hopefully help you along in your reading when we go over the example next time. First of all is you can apply multiple CSS style files to the same page. So I can have two CSS files on the same page. Which one does it get? Well, it gets both of them. And that's only really an issue if there's overlapping style rules, in which case the second one applies. So if I have a style sheet that makes the background color red, and I have a second style sheet that makes the background color blue, the blue takes precedence. The last one wins. All right. That's going to be key to our approach, because what we're going to do is we're going to define sort of a base style sheet that contains certain things that we want no matter how our page is being viewed. All right? So we might have our choice of fonts that our organization uses. All right? We can go and we can put those fonts that we want on our mobile site, on our desktop site, on any kind of site. We can put that in a basic style sheet that has fonts and maybe color scheme and so on. We can then go in a second CSS file that we use a media query to apply only to larger devices and play with the layout of it. Maybe add a background image to the page or whatever. All right? So we can think sort of modularly and think in terms of what they call progressive enhancement. Sort of think of what the starting point of our page is, and then things that we want to add depending on the kind of platform we're on. Next time, what we'll do is we'll discuss two of the philosophies as far as developing these mobile responsive sites using CSS media queries. All right? And we'll actually see some examples. All right? Because you can start with a mobile page and enhance it to work on a desktop, or you can start with a desktop page and chip away from it to make it work on mobile. And we'll compare and contrast those two approaches, and then we'll actually see some examples of this in action. Your first lab, you should be able to get a start on it. I believe it is to create a page using about responsive techniques that itself is responsive. I don't know if I require two style sheets in it or not.
I read it just.
Yeah. So yeah, we don't need to worry about the two style sheets in this one, I don't believe. And just sort of to brush up on our HTML skills, and more importantly, brush up on our flexible CSS skills. All right, for formatting it that way. Questions?
Lab's open now?
Repeat, please.
Lab is open now downstairs tonight? You'll open a lab up?
Oh yeah. If anyone wants to go live. One thing, this being an evening class, a lot of times people prefer to work on their own machines. I may ask, in class if anyone's going to lab. Don't take that as a suggestion not to go to lab. All right. I just want to know because I don't want to sit in an empty room. All right. If I'm going to sit in an empty room, it's going to be in an empty room at home. All right. So, I will ask, but again, don't think I'm discouraging you for going to lab. A lot of times, again, especially in smaller classes, especially given people have their own machines or whatever, a lot of times people will prefer to work on it at home. All right, so you are going to lab then?
No, sir.
No.
No.
I didn't talk you out of it, did I?
You know what? I was just gonna go down and print some stuff up and leave. I can do that at home.
Okay.
It's no big deal.
Is anyone going to lab? All right. Wow. Maybe I shouldn't have given that speech. All right. We'll see you on Wednesday then.
Are you recording this class?
Pardon me?
Are you recording the class?
Yes. Pardon me?
Good.
Okay.
Just a question I have.
Okay.
Should I have you in tomorrow night's class as well?
Okay.
Are you recording that one as well? Still?
I should be, yeah.
Okay.
That one may actually get the good recording in 105.
Oh, that's in 105, okay.
Yeah, I think it is, if I remember right.
Because it may be a problem to show up at least on Tuesday nights, if
Okay.
not during the week.
All right.
This whole getting out at 5 and trying to make it here from
Right.
Scottsdale.
All right.
Thank you.
And this is a different Ben that I talked to. There was another Ben that was your name's Ben. Or,
Yeah.
So when he called you. I spoke to another guy named Ben who was supposed to take this class. So I just
Good guy?
no, I like my size.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's in Ben West.
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah. He had told me that he was taking this class, but I don't know, something works. So
I believe he works over the box.
So I'm sure probably the schedule.
Yep. Small one.